Hey, what's going on, guys? Dan with Gear Focus here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about why I am still using the Sony A7S II and why I'm going to continue to use it in 2020. So before we get started, I just want to go over a few of the specifications that come in the camera. So first up, the camera has a 12.2 megapixel sensor, and that is a 35mm full-frame mirrorless sensor. And with that, we have a max ISO of 409,600 and a minimum ISO of 50. Now, also with this camera, we have the ability to shoot full frame 4K up to 30 frames a second and 1080p up to 120 frames per second. Before we get too far here, I do want to mention that this camera was designed to be a video camera. This camera wasn't really designed to be a photo or a stills camera, and that's made pretty evident by some of the specs that come on this camera, like the 12 megapixel sensor. Now, if you really needed to, you could take some pictures for it. It's actually pretty great for thumbnails, and I've taken some pictures out on the road, and I'll pop a few of them up here on the screen for you. But again, this camera is really not designed to be a photo camera, and it is designed to be a video camera, which is why the video specs on this camera are so fantastic considering that it came out 4 or 5 years ago. So first and foremost, I want to talk to you guys about some of the things that I really like about this camera. Number one is its incredible low light performance. This camera is absolutely amazing when it comes to shooting in low light. As somebody who shoots weddings and events, oftentimes we don't have the best lighting situations, and it's not exactly the easiest thing to take some of our studio lights with us to these locations. There are jobs where we are able to do that, but for the most part, we're not able to take our studio lighting setups for our wedding gigs or our conference gigs. So having a camera that can shoot really well in low light is super beneficial because we're able to have a smaller kit when we go out on the road. Now, speaking about being out on the road, I do a little bit of documentary film work in the off-road community, and with that, we are traveling all over the country and we are driving to pretty remote locations that don't really have any light, whether that is natural or artificial. So having a camera that is able to capture the moments that I need to capture is a must when it comes to low light performance, and that's why I choose the A7S II. So one of the main things that I use the A7S II for is real estate video. It's actually my full-time real estate camera, and I do that because it shoots full frame at 4K. So another benefit of the A7S II is that it is a mirrorless camera, so it is a super lightweight camera, because when I use my 12-24 lens, which is an absolute beast of a lens, and I balance it onto my gimbal, it gets really heavy really quickly. So having a camera that kind of compensates for that heavy lens setup is super awesome when it comes to walking around with a big gimbal or a rig or something like that. And also, because I'm shooting weddings, like I mentioned before, having a camera that is lightweight that I'm able to carry around all day is an absolute must, because if I'm going to be holding a camera for 8 to 10 hours a day, I don't want it to be super heavy. I really don't. So having something that's super lightweight is very important to me, and that's why I still choose to use the A7S II. Now, if you are somebody that doesn't really like a small camera body and you actually prefer a larger style body, something like a Canon 1DX, you can actually go ahead and purchase what I have in my hand here, which is a dual battery grip. And that actually brings me up to my first negative point of the A7S II. The battery life on this camera is pretty trash. It's really bad. One of the first things I bought for this camera before I really invested money into any lenses or anything like that was I invested into a bunch of batteries. I don't leave my house with anything less than 5 batteries, and I also take a dual battery charger with me at all times when it comes to this camera. Each individual battery only gets you about a half an hour of record time, and when you're running around all day and you are recording all day, that eats up super quickly. So that is a pretty big downside, especially considering you have cameras like the Sony A7 III or the Canon EOS R, where they have a single battery that lasts all day. Now, while that's not the biggest deal in the world, I do want to make mention of the fact that that battery life is pretty bad, so that if you do make the decision to go ahead and get yourself an A7S II, you make sure that you get yourself some extra batteries, or you get yourself a power junkie or something like that, just so that you can have a little bit of extra battery life, because trust me, you're probably going to need it. So another thing that can be a bit of an issue with pretty much all of the Sony cameras, this isn't just strictly with the A7S2, is the fact that their menu system is kind of overwhelming. I mean, you have 10 different sections, all of which have like 9 or 10 different sub pages, and it's really overwhelming. Actually, the first time that I got this camera and I started looking through the menus and everything, it took me like an hour and a half to just to figure out exactly where everything was and get everything set up in a way that made sense for my brain. But that's a little bit of a give and a take in my opinion, because with that vast menu system, you are able to make a lot of customizations with the Sony. So you do have, you know, the options for custom buttons and that kind of thing. But again, if you're somebody that needs to be able to pull a camera right out of the box and be able to learn how to use it like within half an hour, then probably a Sony camera in general is not a camera that you want to be looking at, just because those menu systems are so fast. Now, another issue I have with the A7S2 is part of the design of the camera, and that is where Sony decided to put the record button, which in my opinion is the worst spot for a record button. My hand is here on the camera. How am I supposed to press that button? I can't get my thumb over there. I have to either use my other hand or I have to map a custom button, which then means I lose another function of my custom buttons. Whoever designed that camera body and put that record button there it's just plain stupid. Like, come on guys, like, think a little bit there. It's not a good placement, and it's super annoying. But like I said, you can map another custom button, and pretty much every button on the back of the Sony cameras you can map to be a custom button, but again, it is an extra step, and that is a little bit annoying. So I kind of made mention of this earlier, but the last thing I want to talk about is the photo performance for the A7S2. Like I mentioned earlier, it does only have a 12.2 megapixel sensor, which is not exactly the best when it comes to photos. What that means is when you go to take the photos in post, you can't really change a whole lot with the photo. There's not really a whole lot of information there for you to manipulate in the image. You can't really reframe, you can't really do any of that stuff, which is kind of sucky for somebody that's doing a lot more photography. I'm getting into more wedding photography and product photography, so it's a little bit unfortunate for me to have a 12.2 megapixel sensor when I really don't have the ability to make some changes in post. Just for some perspective, the new Apple iPhone 11 Pro has a 12 megapixel camera on it. Granted, that camera doesn't shoot raw photos, but again, it is a 12 megapixel camera as well, so you know, that kind of gives you some perspective on where the photo specs are for the A7S2. So all in all, the A7S2 is still a great camera. It's still got some really great specs on it, and it still works really, really well at the end of 2019 and 2020. And for somebody that's looking for a second camera or even their first camera, it's a really great camera to start out with, especially when you're trying to break into the mirrorless market or into the full frame market, because it is now you are able to get the camera for about $1,500, sometimes less, used online, or if you want to buy it brand new, I believe it's retailing for $2,300. For some perspective, when I bought the camera back in 2016, I paid $3,500 for it, and I bought it with a Metabones adapter and a few other accessories, so that's why the price was a little bit higher, but it retailed for about $3,000 when it came out back in September of 2015. So I'm curious to see what you guys think about the A7S2. Would you still use it in 2019 and 2020, or is it something that you would just kind of pass over and not really even consider? I'm also curious what kind of systems you guys are all running and what you're using for your kits, so leave those in the comments down below. And also, while you're down there, make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, as it really does help us out here on the channel so that we can continue to make more and great content for you guys moving forward. Thanks for watching today, and I'll see you guys in the next one.